A referee and a student are among hundreds of people reportedly killed during massive anti-government protests in Iran. Coach Amir Mohammad Koohkan, 26, was hit by live ammunition on 3 January during protests in the town of Neyriz, his friend told BBC Persian. Everyone knew him for his kindness, they said, adding his family is grieving and angry because he was killed by the regime. 5 days later, student Rubina Aminian, 23, was shot from behind during a protest in Tehran, according to human rights groups. She fought for things she knew were right, her uncle told CNN. Nearly 500 protesters and 48 security personnel have been killed in 2 weeks of protests, a U.S.-based rights group says. U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran's authorities against killing peaceful protesters, saying Washington will come to their rescue. In a brief post on social media, he wrote, "We are locked and loaded and ready to go," but gave no further details. A senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, responded by saying Trump should be careful if he intervened, warning of potential chaos across the Middle East. At least 8 people are reported to have been killed in Iran after almost a week of mass protests sparked by worsening economic conditions. In Friday's post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, "If Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue." In his post, the U.S. president did not specify what action Washington could take against the Iranian authorities. In June, the U.S. carried out strikes against Iran's nuclear sites on Trump's orders. American officials later argued that the strikes had significantly set back the prospect of Tehran building a nuclear weapon, a claim disputed by Iran. In retaliation, Iran launched a missile attack on a major U.S. military base in Qatar. Shortly after Trump's latest social media post, Khamenei advisor Ali Larijani issued a warning of his own. Trump should know that U.S. interference in this internal matter would mean destabilizing the entire region and destroying America's interests, he wrote. But for some of the protesters, intervention from the U.S. would be welcome. They, security forces, are afraid and they shake to the bones when Mr. Trump says something or Mr. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says something, a young woman protesting in Tehran told the BBC's NewsHour program. Preferring to stay anonymous for her own safety, she said protesters had been asking for U.S. support for years because the security forces believe that if Mr. Trump says something, he will do it, and they know if anything happens, they would have to take the consequences. 8 people are reported to have been killed since protests started on Sunday. 2 people died in clashes between protesters and security forces in the southwestern city of Lordigan, according to the semi-official Fars news agency and the human rights group Hengao, which said they were protesters, naming them as Ahmad Jalil and Sajjad Valamanesh. 3 people were killed in Azna and another in Kudasht, all in the west of the country, Fars reports. It did not specify whether they were demonstrators or members of the security forces. 1 death was reported in Fuladshar, central Iran, and another casualty in Marvdasht in the south. BBC has not been able to independently verify the deaths. Footage posted on social media showed cars set on fire during running battles between protesters and security forces. BBC Persian has verified videos showing Thursday's protests in Lordigan, Tehran, and Marvdasht. Iranian officials earlier said a young member of the country's securities forces had been killed on Wednesday in the western city of Kudasht. But protesters said the man was instead from their ranks and had been shot dead by the security forces. On Friday, clashes were reported during the man's burial ceremony, attended by thousands of mourners. Uniformed members of the security forces had tried to carry his coffin, but the crowds wrested it from them and chased them away. The protests began on Sunday in Tehran among shopkeepers angered by another sharp fall in the value of the Iranian currency, the rial, against the US dollar on the open market. By Tuesday, university students were involved, and protests had spread to several cities, with people chanting against the country's clerical rulers. Many protesters have since been calling for the end of Khamenei's rule. Some have said they want a return to the monarchy. The protester who spoke to the BBC said, "We don't have any kind of liberty here. We fight every day. We face the most brutal things every day. We want to end it, the regime, even with the price of our lives. We don't have anything." The protests have been the most widespread since an uprising in 2022 sparked by the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, a young woman accused by morality police of not wearing her veil properly, but they have not been on the same scale. President Masoud Pezeshkian has said he will listen to the legitimate demands of the protesters. But the country's Prosecutor General, Mohammad Moahedi Azad, warned that any attempt to create instability would be met with a decisive response. Referee and student among hundreds killed in Iran protests. 2 hours ago. Ganche Habibi Azad, BBC News Persian, and Jessica Ronsley. Share. Save. Instagram/Iran Human Rights. Amir Mohammad Koohkan and Rubina Aminian. Amir Mohammad Koohkan and Rubina Aminian are among hundreds of protesters reportedly killed during 2 weeks of protests in Iran. A referee and a student are among hundreds of people reportedly killed during massive anti-government protests in Iran. Coach Amir Mohammad Koohkan, 26, was hit by live ammunition on January 3rd during protests in the town of Neyriz, his friend told BBC Persian. They said everyone knew him for his kindness, adding his family is grieving and angry because he was killed by the regime. 5 days later, student Rubina Aminian, 23, was shot from behind during a protest in Tehran, according to human rights groups. Her uncle told CNN she fought for things she knew were right. Nearly 400 protesters and 48 security personnel have been killed in 2 weeks of protests, a U.S.-based rights group says. Sources in Iran have told the BBC the death toll is likely higher than reported. Demonstrations began on January 28 over the economy in the capital, Tehran, and have spread to 186 cities and all 31 provinces, according to the human rights activist news agency. The protests have grown into the largest in years, with calls for an end to the Islamic Republic and rule of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The protests led to a government crackdown, with at least 10,600 people reportedly arrested and 496 protesters killed, according to Harana. Medical staff in Iran have described hospitals overwhelmed with dead and injured patients. BBC Persian verified that 70 bodies were brought to Porsina Hospital in Rasht City on January 9th, and the BBC counted 180 body bags in footage from one morgue near Tehran, thought to have been filmed on the same night. The BBC and most other international news organizations are unable to report from inside Iran, and the Iranian government has imposed an internet shutdown since Thursday, making obtaining and verifying information difficult. Among the protest victims was Koohkan, who was killed in Neyriz, in southwest Fars province, his friend told BBC Persian. The friend did not witness the incident firsthand, but heard from eyewitnesses at the scene. It was far too soon for him, really far too soon. He was so young, the friend said.
The friend said they had known Koohkan, an indoor futsal coach and referee, for 10 years. From childhood, he was my coach, then he became like my brother. They described Koohkan, who had one brother, as someone who didn't like to see people in this state, in this misery. Everyone knew him for his kindness and good nature. The whole town loved him, his friend said. The family are both grieving and angry, grieving because they lost their son, angry because he was killed by the regime. There wasn't even time for CPR. Iran medics describe hospitals overwhelmed with dead and injured protesters. Protesters take to the streets of Tehran on Friday night. Also killed was Rubina Aminian, a Kurdish student who was shot from behind while taking part in a protest on Thursday, according to 3 rights groups. 2 groups, Norway-based Iran Human Rights, IHRNGO, and Kurdish organization Hengao, said she was shot in the head, while the Kurdistan Human Rights Network said she was shot in the back. Both Kurdish groups said she was shot by government forces. The BBC has been unable to independently verify the circumstances of her death. The 23-year-old, whose first name has also been spelled Rubina or Rubina, was studying textile and fashion at Shariati Technical and Vocational College in Tehran, IHRNGO said.
She was a strong girl, a courageous girl, and she was not someone you could control and make decisions for, her uncle told CNN. She fought for things she knew were right and fought hard. He added that she was thirsty for freedom, thirsty for women's rights. Overall, she was a girl who was alive, who lived. Members of Aminian's family traveled from their hometown in Kermanshah, western Iran, to Tehran to identify her body after learning of her death, a source close to the family told INRNGO. The family had to search through hundreds of bodies of young people killed in the protests at a location close to her college, the source said. It wasn't just my daughter. I saw hundreds of bodies with my own eyes, Aminian's mother said, in a statement from the source. Iranian authorities allegedly initially refused to hand over Aminian's body to her family, then prevented her burial or mourning ceremonies in their hometown, the source said. The family was reportedly forced to bury her along the road between Kermanshah and Kamiaran. Iranian leader Khamenei has called anti-government protesters troublemakers, while U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to intervene and said the U.S. military is considering very strong options. Iran has also accused protesters of being backed by the U.S. and Israel. The protests have been the most widespread since an uprising in 2022 sparked by the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, a young Kurdish woman who was detained by morality police for allegedly not wearing her hijab properly. Then, 550 people were killed and 20,000 detained, according to human rights groups.